Well, it's that time again.
What time is that?
It's time to get naked.
Like all the way naked?
Well, keep your clothes on, but it's time for the Naked Party Time podcast, where we get real and raw about life, leadership, and love.
While having lots of fun along the way.
So what do you say? Are you ready to get naked?
Let's do it.
If you're watching or listening to this episode with young, impressionable ears around, this is your warning that you may need to pause the podcast and pick it up later, because we're going to talk about that very personal 3-letter word today. We're going to talk about
sex.
At least that's part of what we're going to talk about. Things like having sex is one of the primary reasons you should get married. And great sex with someone before you're married is one of the ways you know that you're compatible. Right, Sabrina?
I am not feeling this today. I think I should have wrote the script.
Yeah, this is not what we're going to talk about?
I don't think so.
Well, either you picked up on our sarcasm or you are terrified if you're new from the harbor. We are talking about those things today, but we're talking about them as myths in this final part of a podcast series that we never intended to do. Episode 38, we're calling it Busting More Myths about Singleness, Marriage, and Sex. Welcome back, or welcome for the very first time to the Naked Party Time podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. If you're listening, hello to you as well. We do try to keep it real and raw around here while we talk about life, leadership, and love. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Jeff Manis. I'm joined by my wife, my podcast queen, my co-host, Sabrina. You just got back from last weekend at the ladies' retreat.
Yeah, it was fun.
The harbor. Anything you want to share about that? How was that?
It was good. I wasn't really sure what to expect and if I would feel overwhelmed. And I didn't want it to be all about me, but I knew people would be excited to meet me, and I'm excited to meet people. And
Did you wear a shirt that says, "I'm kind of a big deal"?
No, but I should have. With a dill pickle on it.
Oh my goodness. Wow. No, it's not what I was thinking, but okay. It's good.
Haven't you seen that before?
I have not. I'm kind of
a big
dill.
deal.
I have not seen that. I was thinking of a movie that you've probably never seen.
Oh.
Anchorman.
Oh, I don't think I have seen that.
Okay. We're off to a great start here. You actually won an award.
Yes, I
at
did.
Ladies' Retreat. Was it Ladies' Retreat or Women's Retreat?
I think they say Women's Retreat.
Okay. What was the award that you won?
Who made the most friends?
Because you met how many people?
60 out of 99 women I met.
I was impressed that you counted how many people you met.
Well, Aunt Jane printed off the list.
Yep.
And then we sat in our room, went through every single name, and she helped me remember who I met. So I didn't go up to anybody. So 60 women came up to me, and I didn't get to talk to everybody, but I got to hear a lot of stories and talk to a lot of women. It was really awesome.
That's awesome. So you went to ladies' retreat. What did you say it was?
Women's
retreat. And when this episode drops, I'll be in my 4th week of working at the harbor.
That's crazy.
Can you believe it?
No.
It's crazy.
Do you feel like it's gone by fast?
I feel like these first 4 weeks have flown by.
Because all you've been doing is having a ton of meetings.
And tons of meetings. I've met with every single pastor on staff. I've met with some of the other staff that's non-pastor. I've been to every recurring team meeting that they have. Met with some board members, leadership team. Met with some of them for multiple times. So
we still haven't really figured out our routines yet, because you're not into a preaching routine, and I've been having lunches and meeting with people, and so it's been fun. But I feel like there's a purpose to what we're doing, even though the routine isn't there. It feels purposeful, and so I don't feel lost anymore.
Yes,
because I felt lost for quite a while.
Yeah. So on my first Sunday, I joined Pastor Rick on stage to retell the story of how God brought us to this place. Then the last 2 Sundays, I did announcements, which was awesome to be on stage as a part of the worship service. Easter is this coming Sunday, April 17th. And then I preached my first sermon on April 24th, and I am so excited.
And how long have you had the sermon done?
I've had this sermon idea mapped out since before we moved here. So I haven't preached since January 9th. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I might spontaneously combust on the platform. I've got some pent up preaching energy, as you know.
Yes.
That happens. So
Yeah. It's always my favorite to come back after you haven't preached for a while. And I always come to both services because I know you're going to be fired up for both, but I want to see the first service. And so it's exciting.
I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm also preaching a brand new sermon that Sunday. It's
wow.
one of my favorite stories in the Bible that I never did a sermon on at Element.
Oh.
I don't know why.
Crazy.
Never preached on it, but it's one of my favorite stories. I'm preaching a brand new sermon on Mother's Day as well. Preaching from a story I've never preached from before, so that's cool.
Yeah.
Super excited about that. But enough about that. 2 episodes ago, we intended to do just one standalone podcast called Celebrating Singleness. Then I felt after that we should cover a couple myths that we tend to believe about singleness and marriage, which led to some more myths.
They just keep coming.
That I want to cover today, which is now this episode, the final one in this 3-part unintended series. I do have some more, but I promise we're going to come back to those at a later date. We're going to end this subject today. And I promise that's not a myth. We are ending this today.
That's good.
We'll move on in the next episode. So it's just as we kept peeling back the layers on this subject, I just thought there's a few more things we could address, right?
Yeah, there is.
So if you haven't listened to episode 36 and 37, I would encourage you to go back, watch, or listen to those. Today's myths revolve around singleness, marriage, specifically sex. But before we get into the sex stuff, here's this one more myth about singleness and marriage I wanted us to talk about. And this one has been huge in the Christian church over the years. So what is our first myth today, Sabrina?
Myth number 1, God won't give you a spouse until you trust him completely.
Sounds really spiritual.
I know, I was going to say, it doesn't really sound that bad.
Doesn't sound bad, which is one of the reasons I think why we say it,
Yeah.
believe it, and use it.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that in the church. And if I'm being honest, there were many years of my life I would say it.
Yeah, because it feels true.
Yeah. And it is said with the purest of intentions.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone says that with any ill will or ill intention. Like, hey, God won't give you a spouse until you trust him completely. The crazy part is the only people who say that are married people. Which is very convenient because it makes us feel really good about ourselves that we must have trusted God because he gave us a spouse.
Yeah.
And we use this myth with different words. Maybe you've heard it said this way before, maybe even used these before. And can I just please encourage us to stop saying these things? We say things typically to single people who are struggling in their singleness like, well, until you're content with Jesus, he won't give you a spouse. Or the reason you've not found a spouse is you haven't surrendered that to God. Again, sounds really spiritual. Whatever variation of that myth we might use. So, can we please stop saying things like that? They are not helpful.
Yeah.
Especially to our single brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, should we trust Jesus completely? Absolutely.
Yes.
Should we be content with only Jesus? 100%. Should we surrender our relationship status, single or married, to the Lord? Yes, yes, and yes. But none of that will determine whether I get married or not. None of it. None of that determines whether I even should be married or not, which is what we talked about in a couple of podcasts ago. Marriage is not a reward for those who trust Jesus the most. In fact, some of the most contented, surrendered, fully devoted followers of Jesus I know are single. Some of them are committed and contented to being single for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
It's horrible theology and even worse advice for us to be promoting this myth. The point of surrender, the point of contentment, and the point of trusting Jesus completely is to get more of Jesus.
Yeah.
And to grow in holiness, not for us to get closer to marriage and have a hot spouse.
Right. Which, I mean, you do have a hot spouse.
I do have a hot spouse. And I better stop there before I get in trouble. Anything you want to say there?
If we could no matter what your status is, single, divorced, married, it doesn't matter. You're a child of God, and all that matters is that you are living for Jesus, loving him more than anything else. And we don't do those two things to get things from him.
Absolutely. Amen.
We do it because that's what he's called us to do.
Amen.
And we live that way because he's called us to live that way. And if he decides to say, yes, I want you to be married, then he'll figure it out.
Yep.
Like, we get so hung up on all these things we want and desire, and we need to live the life we know we're supposed to be living.
Yep. And listen, we know there are lots of great Christian single people who have a desire to be married one day, but for whatever reason, they're not. Mm-hmm. And let me first say, we see you, we are for you, and we love you. As Sabrina said, there is nothing wrong with your desire to be married. Absolutely nothing. But I can't say this often enough. There is also nothing wrong with being single.
Right.
Absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's actually nothing wrong with God not giving us our desires. Mm-hmm. He does that all the time.
Yeah.
That's actually called discipleship.
Yeah.
Part of discipleship is not getting everything we desire, yet still being fully devoted to Jesus and fully alive in him alone. So to those married people who are concerned about our single friends wanting to be married, maybe we could learn a thing or two from them about trusting Jesus, being surrendered to him and being content with him. And maybe, instead of trying to find our single friends a companion, we could choose to be a part of their community.
Yes.
As we all walk with Jesus together. So let's stop promoting the myth that if we fully trust Jesus, he'll give us a spouse. There are plenty of people who don't trust Jesus, who have a spouse, and plenty who do, who have never been married.
And we don't have to figure out why.
Yes.
We don't need to know why for everything.
Yes.
I feel like especially if you're a black and white person,
sometimes you don't know the why.
Yeah. And we may never know the why. And that's okay. We don't have to figure it out.
Yep. I think part of us not knowing the why that God designed it this way is so we keep seeking him.
It's having faith.
He's the why.
Yeah. And trusting him.
So that's enough about that final single myth. Now let's tackle the myths about sex.
Oh boy.
Sabrina, what's the next myth we're going to discuss, or maybe, not discuss? What's the next one I will rant about?
Okay, yeah, let's put it that way. Sex isn't important in a marriage.
Say that again. What's the key word there?
Sex isn't
is not
important in a marriage.
Can I just say that's a lie?
Yeah.
It's a lie. Sex is not the ultimate thing.
Right.
Or the only thing.
Right.
But it is a vitally important thing in a marriage.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about like the act of sex. I'm talking about the pure intimacy that should be resulting in sexual expression between a husband and a wife. Mm-hmm. True marital intimacy should regularly result in pure, consensual, and pleasurable sexual expression between a husband and a wife. Now, we don't have time to go into all the things that might be roadblocks to sexual intimacy in a marriage. We talked a lot more about that in episodes 21 and 22, which were literally all about sex. I would encourage you to go watch or listen to those. You can also find tons of helpful information from places like Authentic Intimacy, which is an incredible organization led by Dr. Julie Slattery that I highly recommend. We'll put that in the show notes.
And can I throw in another
podcast?
Please do. Heaven in Your Home by Francie Winslow. I've listened to several of her podcasts, and it's for married couples. But again, it's just another woman's voice that is coming at you, and it's real and raw, and it's really good.
So it's good. Thank you. We'll put that in the show notes too. Sex in marriage is one of the key ways that a couple is fused together at the deepest level.
Yeah. Like
sex is not just a physical act. It's physical, It's designed to be pleasurable, but it's also deeply emotional and incredibly spiritual.
Yeah.
In almost every study that's ever been done, both Christian and non-Christian alike, couples who report healthy and frequent sex in their relationship also report much higher levels of relational contentment and satisfaction. There's a direct cause and effect.
Right.
But I want to go back to this spiritual piece for a moment. This is the game changer for me. We shared this in our sex podcast last year, but it's still just as powerful today. Matt and Lori Krieg, who wrote a book together called Impossible Marriage, which we highly recommend. Here's 2 quotes, one from Matt, one from Lori. They're kind of lengthy, so hang with me. This is from Matt Krieg. Sex is about physical touch to be sure, but it is far more than physical touch. It is about what is going on inside us. Sex becomes a form of physical prayer, a picture of heavenly intimacy that rivals the shekinah glory of old. Our God, who is spirit, can be found behind the very physical panting, sweating, and pleasurable entangling of limbs and body parts. He doesn't turn away. He wants us to run into sex, but to do so with his presence, his priorities, and his virtues making our pursuit. If we experience sex this way, we will be transformed in the marriage bed every bit as much as we are transformed on our knees in prayer.
Wow. Every time I hear that, I'm just blown away. It's
brilliant.
It is brilliant. It gives you such a...
It's a mental image.
Yes, but it's like, I don't know, like so full or
yes,
something.
Yeah,
I don't even know
full's a good word.
I don't know how to explain it.
And then Lori said this to go along with it, which is also brilliant. Sex in marriage is a metaphor inside the metaphor itself. Marriage between a husband and wife is a metaphor of God's desire to be one with humanity. It points us to the marriage between Christ and the church. The covenant of sex in marriage is modeling what Christ bodily did for us on the cross. Jesus saying, I am holistically giving and covenanting myself to you on the cross. So we say that through our sex, but we also say to our spouse through sex, this is how God wants to be one with you. He is the completer of you. He is the one who pursues you and desires you. We've overemphasized sex, but completely diminished it by not holding it up as this theological dance.
Man, go read that book. I don't care if you're single, married, divorced. Read this book. It's amazing. So good.
So sex is a gift to every marriage. When pursued with purity, it protects the marriage covenant.
Yeah.
It binds the two together in ways that literally nothing else can. To say that sex is not important is to cheapen something that God created as a profoundly spiritual act into nothing more than another way to have an orgasm. But it's not what it's for.
Right. I was just thinking, do you think what we watch plays into what sex might look like in a marriage, that we're hindered by that in a sense?
Yeah. It becomes a glorified act of pleasure.
Yeah.
Instead of a God-honoring act of unity.
Right. Because it should be this private thing that is just between you guys and you talk about it and you communicate about it. But I think sometimes, depending on what you're watching, you're maybe seeing it all the time and it loses its
That's really good.
meaning.
It loses its power.
It's from the creator and that it was created for marriage and it should only be done in marriage.
Yeah.
And
it's good. It's good. So that myth, a lot of Christians believe it, that sex is not important in marriage. We talked about it on those other 2 podcasts last year. The percentage of marriages that are considered sexless marriages is astounding.
Yeah, I remember those.
It's astounding.
It is.
So that's the first one about sex. We have 2 more about sex, and they're the final 2 of this podcast. So what's the next myth about sex, Sabrina?
Sex is the reason to get married.
Yeah. Sex is the reason to get married. This is very much an exclusive problem in the conservative evangelical Christian church. Mm-hmm. One of the problems when we tend to glamorize sex, which not only has our culture done that, but the church has kind of followed suit.
Yeah.
When we glamorize sex, while also holding to the teaching that God-honoring sex is to be enjoyed within the boundaries of marriage, which we believe, by the way.
Yeah.
We can unintentionally raise a generation of virgins who very easily start to believe that sex itself is a great reason to get married. Now, I don't know if you remember this from our youth group days. We met in youth group.
Yeah.
So there was a big age difference between us, but I will never forget our youth pastor. I don't think it was Chris England yet. It was a volunteer leading the youth ministry at that time. But that we were having a big youth group, and the topic of sex came up. No, wasn't even talking about sex. Our youth pastor asked the group, "What is your biggest fear?"
Ask the whole boys and girls?
Yes.
The whole group.
So it wasn't, I said that wrong. We were not talking about sex.
Okay.
I said, "What is your biggest fear?" I will never, ever, ever forget this. And I said it partly to get a laugh.
But there's truth.
But there's truth to it. You know, you know, okay. So I said, my biggest fear is that I will die before I get married, because then I won't get to have sex. So I was believing the lie that sex is the reason to get married.
Well, the Big C church has just messed up sex in general. Not intentionally, but just in how we too, we're guilty
Absolutely.
too.
It's an unintended consequence.
It is of we're trying to save people from making mistakes, but
from the heartache of what can happen.
Yes, because we know the consequences, but we're almost pushing them in a sense to do it because it's just so confusing.
Yeah. Which we don't have time to get into this, and I don't want to chase it, but I want to say it. Back in those other two podcasts, this teaching on purity, which we should teach the pursuit of purity.
Yes.
But one of the unintended consequences is other lies that then are believed, that sex is dirty, sex is bad. And so then we have raised a young generation that gets married, and sex is not a priority in their marriage because all they've been told their whole life is no, 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 no. And then they're supposed to flip this switch on when they get married, and it doesn't work that way. It's not just saying no to sex till you're married. It's say yes to the way of Jesus because it's best. And the way of Jesus will lead you into understanding it with a greater priority.
Right.
But we can't chase that.
I know.
But go back and listen to those other two podcasts that I mentioned. We talk about some of those other lies that we believe about sex. Now, I do know that Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 7, he says it's better for a man to be married than to burn with lust. But I'm quite certain his main focus here wasn't just to get hitched so you can satisfy being horny.
Right.
That's not what he was talking about.
Right.
Like, getting married so you can have sex is like buying Southwest airline tickets to get the peanuts. I mean, the peanuts are good, but let's be honest, they're not that good.
No, it's not. It's not
right?
worth it.
That's a pretty large commitment for an incredibly small payoff. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
So getting married just to have sex is a horrible reason to get married.
Right.
You're going to have a really, really struggling marriage if that's your hope.
Because more than likely, you're not going to do it every single day like you may think you're going to do.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many students, when we were a youth pastor, young men typically, I can't wait to get married because then you can have sex whenever you want. And I'm like, oh, dear Lord.
Help them.
Help them understand. But we do believe that.
I know. Well, there has to be some kind of balance in our teaching that, yes, God created sex within the bonds of marriage. It is good.
It's a beautiful thing.
And even in marriage, like living a pure life affects your single life and your married life, no matter what kind of disciple you end up being, married or single. Like, being pure, it affects that, and living for Jesus is what's most important. And getting married solves nothing.
Yep. Yeah. So we've shared 2 sex myths so far. Probably plenty more things we could say about those, but first one was sex is not important in marriage, which is a myth. It's a lie. Sex is a reason to get married. I should just get married so I can have sex. Horrible reason to get married, and that's also a lie.
Yeah.
And we got one more sex myth. Sabrina, why don't you share that one?
Sex confirms we should get married.
Sex confirms that we should get married. Or better worded this way in today's culture, well, you have to have sex before you're married to know if you're compatible. You pick up on my sarcasm when I say that?
A little bit, just a little bit.
Sarcasm is one of my
love languages.
my spiritual gift, sarcasm. First of all, did we skip junior high class, health class somewhere, right? I remember junior high health class vividly, especially when they showed us an actual birth.
Yes, oh my gosh.
Scarred me for life. But beyond that, in junior high health class, I remember learning that we are all compatible. Not trying to be crude here in any way, but our body parts, those particular body parts, they are designed by God himself to fit perfectly together in sex. Those body parts are compatible, right? To which I've heard people actually say this. They said it to me as a pastor. Well, you wouldn't buy a car before test driving it, would you?
Oh, my Lanta.
Which is an incredibly demeaning view of both sex, marriage, and your partner.
Yes.
But my response is this. What do you do with a car after you've put a lot of miles on it?
Get rid of it.
You trade it in. You look for an upgrade. So if you treat sex and marriage like you do buying a car, you're going to get the same results. And those results might come back on you.
And those results are consequences for maybe the rest of your life.
Yep.
Just natural consequences.
Yep.
Man.
And I have much more to say, but I'll make this the last thing concerning this compatible conversation. According to research, the average married couple has sex around 7 times a month.
I think that's a pretty good number.
I thought that was pretty impressive for the average. Now, this study I think is pretty old. I pulled this from an old sermon I did.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know how, but let's just for fun. Because it's still, the point I'm making still remains the same.
I agree.
Let's be generous and say it's 2 times a week, which I think would be really, if couples are doing that, it's pretty healthy.
Well, and compared to the stats we gave in our marriage podcast.
Sexless marriages. Now, I know some people are thinking 2 times. Like, we've never had sex that much. And other couples are thinking only 2 times? But don't get caught up on the number. It's just, let's just call it the average among couples is 2 times a week. They also, in the study, found that each sexual experience of these couples they studied lasted on average 3 to 7 minutes. That means there are 10,066 minutes left every week where you are not having sex. So I would really challenge you to make sure you're compatible in a few more key areas of your life than just your sex life. It is such a small amount of time that you are having sex that you should probably spend some effort, maybe some money, on getting counseling and compatibility in other areas of your life. In fact, I would say if you are compatible in other areas like emotionally, relationally, financially, spiritually, the sex piece might just happen naturally.
Well,
do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Because you have to work on all the things so everything works the right way.
Correct. In fact, I would even reiterate that. I would say, as couples, before we're married and then in a marriage, if we would focus on being united, compatible, united, intimate, and compatible emotionally, relationally, financially, and spiritually, I believe the physical sexual intimacy will naturally happen if we're united, compatible, intimate in those other areas.
Right.
It's the intended expression of intimacy in every other area. Now, again, we talk about all sorts of roadblocks and counseling that might need to happen and trauma, all those things in those other podcasts. We are not touching everything here, but sexual compatibility, we're born with sexual compatibility as male and female.
Right.
We just are.
Yeah.
So there you go. I promise next time we'll move on from our discussion of myths. We're planning on doing a series of episodes coming up on the rhythms of transition. We found ourselves in transition, coming here, and did some things well.
We are continuing the transition piece for quite some time.
Struggled with some things, but been talking about some of the things that we now learned that we could maybe help others with, and it's not just transitions of job or moving. Like any transition in life, these things will apply to. Again, having just walked through it, we just noticed there's some rhythms that kept us grounded in the midst of it. Ones that we didn't do very well that would have kept us grounded better, and want to talk through some of those. If you enjoyed today's podcast, or even if you didn't, which judging on today's episode, maybe they didn't.
This could be 50-50.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep. We might get a string of negative comments. Mm-hmm. We'll see. We'd love to hear from you either way.
Yeah.
You can email us your comments or questions to hello@jeffmanis.com. You can also reach out on social media. Just look up Jeff Manis or Sabrina Manis and you can probably find us there. You could also, would love it if you would like, rate, review, share the podcast on all of the platforms. It really will help us get this out to more people. Sabrina, why don't we end like we always do? Do you have anything else to say?
No. Do you think I have something else to say?
I had one more thing I was going to say, but I'm going to leave it.
Oh, okay.
It was really, really good, but I'm going to let the podcast listeners just wonder what it was.
Oh, okay. Are you sure you want to do that?
Yep. It might lead into the podcast. Why don't we end like we always do with our marriage mission? We are united in Christ, unstoppable with Christ, and unbreakable because of Christ. Now it's time for you to go get naked
and party.
We'll see you on the other side. You've been listening to the Naked Party Time podcast. Join us next time as we get real and raw about life, leadership, and love.